Hi everyone, thanks for joining in. I'm excited to have Kim Lock join me. Hi Kim.
Hi, Jackie. Thanks so much for having me.
So, a little bit about Kim. She's an internationally published author of 5 novels, including the best-selling The Other Side of Beautiful, and her essays and opinion pieces have been published widely, including in The Guardian, the Sydney Morning Herald, and Kill Your Darlings. And she lives in the southeast of South Australia with her family, and her latest book is The Fancies, which I've got my copy there, and I can see your one there.
Yeah.
So thanks so much, Kim, for joining us.
Ah,
Wondering if you want to start off by telling us a bit about the fancies.
sure, I'd be happy to. Oh, where do I start? This is one of those novels that I still haven't figured out how to sum up in a sentence.
Yeah.
Um, so it's about a woman named Abigail Fancy, who left her tiny hometown at the southern tip of South Australia when she was 17, 24 years ago, and she swore she would never come back.
Mm,
And then the story begins one night when Abigail, at 39, just out of her second stint in prison and completely out of time, arrives home very reluctantly. Nobody in town is expecting her to turn up. Her parents aren't expecting her to turn up, but she does. And as the story takes place over the space of the next few days, this very small town, which is a crayfishing town in southern South Australia, called Port Kingerton, implodes. The town rumor mill goes crazy.
mm,
Uh, Old secrets are dug up and old scandals are rehashed. And something that set the town ablaze 24 years ago when she left is reignited. It probably doesn't help that the same day as Abigail came back, a human thigh bone has just
mm.
washed up on the beach. So there's a lot happening. And the characters certainly think there's a lot happening, but whether a lot happens remains to be seen.
Yeah. And I have to say, I loved the family, the Fancies family. They were certainly an interesting family. I have to say, my probably most favourite was old Dick.
Yes, yes. So the story, that's a great point. The story is told in three voices. So we have the
Mm,
voice of Abigail, we have the collective voice of the town itself and the characters in the town, and then we have a third voice which is Abigail's grandfather, Old Dick
mm.
Fancy, and he's living with dementia. So his ability to recount the story is often called into question. He time collapses for him
Mm,
with what he's going through. So
mm.
his voice surprised me to write. I thought he
Oh,
would be the hardest,
yeah.
but he was actually the easiest. He came
Oh,
out really,
really?
yeah.
Yeah. Mm. No, I loved his character. Do you want to share with us, like, what was the first thought you had for this novel?
Yeah, so it was quite a few years ago now. Often my novels take quite a few years, I think, to germinate, to go from seed to what is on the shelves.
Mm.
But it was quite a few years ago. I've lived away from my hometown for about 20 years. I didn't leave in the same circumstances as Abigail, I just have to say. But so I've lived away from my hometown for about 20 years. And a few years ago, we made the decision to finally move back.
Mm.
And I think that planted the seed for this story because I thought going back to a small town after having lived all over Australia for 20 years, I left when I was 19, 20. I'm coming back when I'm in my late 30s. What's it going to be like? I started thinking, am I going to act like a teenager again? It really brought all these feelings that I wasn't expecting and all these questions. And I thought, what's going to happen if I run into people from high school? Are they going to know that I've grown up? Of course they did. And of course, nobody's thinking about you as much as you think they're thinking about
Yeah.
you, which is also where the seed for this story came from, in that we're all a little bit egocentric, I think. And it's a matter of understanding that everybody's living in their own heads, you know, not quite where we think they are.
Yeah, yeah. And we've got a few people watching, so just wanted to say to the people watching, if you've got any questions or a shout out from where you're watching from, please type it in comments and I can read it out. Um
Absolutely. Hi, everyone.
I was amazed with your cover, all the the gold, and can you tell us a little bit about that? What did you have any input, and what did you think when you first saw it? And
Yeah, I know. Isn't it gorgeous? Well, it's interesting actually. Tend to leave the covers to my publishers. That's
mm,
their domain. But I got it quite late in the process. Sort of usually we expect to cover, 5 to 6 months before publication. It was really getting down to the wire, and I was thinking, oh, what's happening? And
mm,
when my publisher sent me the proof, she said, it's not been an easy task. There was so many people who loved a lot of the earlier iterations of the cover, which I haven't seen. I mean, I just saw this, which is enough for me because I love it. I
mm,
think it's beautiful. But what I don't actually have on me is a copy of my previous novel, The Other Side of Beautiful, which had a cover that has almost similar theme, but it's like a sunburst.
yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
Yeah,
mm,
and that was such a striking cover, and it really struck a chord with readers that I think my publishers wanted to. Oh, it's actually on the back of. It's a bit tiny to see, but
oh
it's on the
yeah,
back.
there's a small one. Yeah,
I
mm,
think my publishers wanted to make a nod to that, so that you can perhaps maybe remember that it's the same author. But
mm,
I love this kind of, she's getting sucked into a whirlpool and she's trying to clamber out. So it's such a
mm.
striking cover, and when you see it on the shelf with other covers, it really stands out.
Yeah,
So
it certainly does. And could you tell us when you're reading a book, what do you think makes a good story for you?
oh gosh, that's fantastic. Anything, any story, I think well told.
Mm,
Um, I think the writer's voice, I think, is what really sucks me in. I'll often say that some of my favorite writers could be, writing about the proverbial grass growing, and it would be entertaining. I think the voice really matters. Anything that just holds your attention, I think. So whether it moves, the plot can move quickly, and that will hold my attention, or the
mm,
character can have a really interesting way of thinking. So
mm,
yeah, I tend to read really quite broadly. But yeah, so I think perhaps the short answer would be voice. I think the
mm,
way the way the author taught, and it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't
mm,
have to be beautiful poetic prose, just as long as it's interesting and engaging,
mm.
I think. And I really love a good opening sentence and like a
Yeah.
good page.
Mm.
Tend to be a bit impatient, often people will say about a book, they might say, stick with it, it gets good by about page 50 or
Mm.
page 100, and by then I'm a bit like,
Yeah.
so get me on the first page, I think, and then I'm hooked.
Yeah, so you need something that really grabs you.
I think so.
Yeah.
So maybe I have a short attention span.
And I'm talking about what you like. Is there anything you might have read lately that you want to recommend to us?
Yes, I actually have just finished Tom Lake
Oh,
by
okay, yeah.
Anne
Good.
Patchett. She's one of my
Mm,
favorite writers. She is. I would read anything she wrote, and I would think it
mm,
would be fascinating. And what's interesting about this story is, like I was just saying, it's a really gentle, simple story. It's set during the pandemic when three grown-up daughters go home and ask their mother to tell them a story about this one summer when she was in her 20s and she dated a famous actor who wasn't famous at the time. And that's it. That's the whole premise of the story. They're picking cherries as
mm,
they talk. But it's just the way she writes it.
mm,
It's really engaging, and the characters are all so well drawn and so relatable, and it's just a love story. So that's I would really recommend that if you're looking for something that is just uplifting and
yeah.
reminds you that, like she says, it explores what it means to be happy even when the world is falling apart. So
Mm, mm,
I think that's a really great message.
yeah. Yeah, no, that sounds like a good one. Um, Sharon wonders if you're working on your next book at the moment, and if so, if you can tell us anything about it.
Hi, Sharon. Thanks for asking. I'm actually between books at the moment,
Mm,
which is a really interesting place to be. I can't say I'm not working on it because I'm in the daydreaming phase. It's, you know, you wake up, you're thinking about it, you go to bed, you're thinking about it. I'm constantly going to my notepad to jot down, you know, sort of like a mind dump and lines of dialogue and things that the characters might be thinking or saying or doing.
Mm,
I wish I could tell you about it, but I think I don't know enough about it
yeah.
myself. But I do have a contract to write another novel, so absolutely I have got to get onto it at some point. But yeah, at the moment it's in the daydreaming phase, which I think is really important, and it seems to take me so much longer than the actual writing.
Mm,
Once I sit down and start writing, it's you know, maybe 6 to 12 months. But the gestation period, I think, for stories takes a while for me. So that's where I'm at the moment.
yeah. And so do you have a favorite part of your writing process and maybe also a least favorite part?
Yeah, okay. I love editing. I'm one of those
Mm,
writers seem to fall into two camps. They either like the initial draft or they like
mm,
editing. I love editing. That's where I really shine. The hardest thing for me is these days is the first draft.
yeah.
It's each novel seems to the first draft seems to have gotten more and more difficult just because I with editing, that's how I make it better. That's how I
Mm,
make it sing. And the first draft needs to be messy. You know, it needs to make no sense and be horrible and really raw because you know you've got to start with something. So particularly writing the fancies, I had a lot of trouble with the first draft. I think my inner critic was too loud.
mm,
So I think I need to do maybe some work on if not quieting the inner critic, at least just not listening to it,
mm,
to allow myself to get that first draft done because that's hard. But I absolutely love probably about draft 3 or 4.
mm,
Once the structure is in place and the characters are all there, and you can really start fine tuning it. I think
mm,
that's my favorite part.
yeah.
That
Yeah.
and the daydreaming, I think, because when you're daydreaming, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
No, this novel is the best thing ever. It's fully formed and it's fantastic. But
Mm,
at some point, you've got to put it on paper, and it never quite looks like it is in your
yeah.
head.
And yeah, and talking about that a bit, do the characters seem to stick with you after you've finished a book and you're starting on a new one?
Yeah, it varies. Some
Mm,
have stuck with me for a really long time. Like
mm,
my third novel, The Three of Us. I don't think those characters have fully left me yet, which is interesting
mm,
because that novel's being re-released in October.
mm,
Um, whereas other books have ended quite quickly. Possibly the fancies, I think, is one where by the time the book came out, the characters they'd said their piece and they were largely done,
mm.
which is good because they had a lot to say. so so yes and no. Some linger with you a bit longer, and others you really are quite happy to see the back of them, I think.
Mm. And Jesse wonders if you could talk us a bit through a bit of your writing process.
Hi, Jesse. Yes, okay. That is a fantastic question because having only written 5 novels, I'm still attaching only to 5. You know, I'm thinking about some writers who've
Five's
written,
getting quite, yeah, it's still a
yeah,
lot,
some, you
yeah.
know, some authors have written 20 or 30 or more.
Mm,
Each novel has been slightly different, and that's probably because my first novel I wrote and was published when my children were babies. They were very young. So each time I've written, my kids have been older, and we've usually moved house. You know, we're an ex-defence force family, so
mm,
um, I've always had to be flexible. Each book kind of has had its own little era. Like my first book was when they were babies,
mm,
and I could write with them, you know, strapped on me, and I would write sitting on one of those bouncy balls, and they were quiet. Whereas as they got older and they needed more time and more attention, for instance, my second and third books were written in an hour every evening. That was the only time
mm,
I had when my husband came home from work and he was able to, you know, keep an eye on the kids. And so that's when I wrote my second and third novel, you know, in the evening. I was probably luckier with my fourth novel in that my husband had retired, so I had more time.
oh,
So
yeah.
in that case, it looked more like a normal 9 to 5 job, you know, sort of fitting it in. I'm a graphic designer as well, so fitting it in with my graphic design work. The thing that's predictable about each novel is the daydreaming phase takes several years. And then there's the writing of the first draft, which takes between a few months to a year. And then redrafting can take about a year. That's probably the process in a nutshell. In terms of, a lot of writers will have ritual or schedule or a place that they write. I've had to be flexible over the years. And so my only kind of predictableness is unpredictability. I have to be able to write wherever, whenever.
Yeah.
It's definitely my process. And I think I have to be able to sneak up on my muse. I think if my muse knows I'm coming, she hides. So I've got to sneak up when she's least expecting it and sit down and squirrel away some words.
Yeah. Do you ever find you get writer's block? And if you do, is there something you find that helps?
Yeah. There are a lot of writers who will say that the best way to deal with so-called writer's block is to not believe in it. I read one writer, and I've forgotten his name, but he said, if somebody gave me $1 million to write one sentence, I would absolutely be able to do it, even if I felt really blocked. So I think writer's block is another name for when your critic is too loud, your self-critic is too loud, which is potentially what I'm going through at the moment. I do feel that if I was to sit down and try and write now, I might struggle. So possibly the way to deal with it, if a writer is feeling stuck, is to give yourself a bit of time. Forgive yourself, because creative output is like the seasons. We can't always be in spring and summer. You've got to have autumn and winter. You've got to come back in, and you've got to rest, and you've got to regenerate and start again. Well, that's what I'm telling myself anyway.
No, that's a great way to say that.
Another way, sometimes if I'm really stuck, is to just pick up something that I love to read from a writer I really admire. Sometimes all it takes is to read half a page of a fantastic voice, and the imagination starts sparking. I think you have to be reading. That's a really big one for me. I can't write if I'm not reading.
Yeah. And is there anything that you like to do to help re-energize yourself? Any hobbies or past?
Yeah, okay. Well, I love gardening. I have a veggie garden, so I'm always out. I think getting outside. I know that it's probably a cliche, but it's such a big one for me. If I'm inside, I start to find it too intolerable after a while. So I'm always out in the garden, or I run. I started running a couple of years ago, and that's a big one. A lot of writers are runners, it seems to.
Yeah, I've spoken to a few.
Or go on long walks. It just seems to be something we do. I think there's something in that sort of process of getting out of yourself and just being in nature and getting some fresh air and so yeah, I think just sort of moving.
Yeah.
Physically moving sometimes can kickstart things.
And when I say to you a successful writer, what does a successful writer look to you like?
That is such an excellent question. I think the parameters are always changing. And I think that in that question, you probably hit on something that I often struggle with, is that the feeling that the goalposts are always moving. When I was writing my first book, I just wanted to be published. I would have thought that it was a success just to find a publisher. But I think it's the nature of the publishing beast sometimes that then you go, well, then I want this next benchmark. Maybe bestseller list, which is a whole story of its own, because which bestseller list and in what way? So that's really interesting, Jackie, because I think every writer would give you a different answer. So you've given me lots to think about. That's so fantastic. But probably the best way to explain it is to never lose your own sense of self as a writer, to always feel like you're tapping into what you really want to say, and the story you really want to tell. And however you can manage to keep doing that in this industry, which can sometimes be tricky.
Yeah.
Me, I think that would be successful. Obviously, there's commercial levels of success, maybe in the fact that you'll always be published. you know, there are writers out there sometimes who have had a few books published and they still have to keep pitching. They still have
Yeah.
to, you know, they still face rejection.
Mm.
And then there are writers who are always going to be published because
Automatic.
they're an
Yeah.
established name. So maybe there's that as well. There's maybe different levels of success. Does that answer your question, or have I just like
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. Thanks.
gone off
Yeah.
on a tangent?
No, that's a good answer. And I've got a great question from Kim. She says, have you learnt or changed anything in your writing as you've written more books?
I love that. Yes, Kim, I definitely have. I have learnt to say more with less words. Don't take my last answer to the last question as a sign of that. But I think that I've just grown. I look in loving editing so much. I think is where I've learnt to just cut and say what I really want to say without trying to make it sound really pretty or sound really lyrical. So I think I've just really honed my own voice and learnt to sound more like me, which they do say can take writers up to 500,000 or 1,000,000 words. Apparently, I read that somewhere, that you actually have to write enough to discover your own voice, to kind of get out of your own way. So I think that's probably what I've learned, if that's not too vague.
Yeah, no, that's another great answer. And I'm wondering as well, what do you hope that readers will love about the fancies?
With the fancies, I really just wanted to entertain people. I think we've had an interesting, if not rough, couple of years. And I really just want people to come away feeling like they've just had a ball. These characters are so colourful and so vibrant and so much larger than life that I just want. It's almost a bit of a train wreck too. Sometimes you feel like you can't look away. So I think I just want people to have a chance to just get completely out of themselves and to see the humour and the absurdity in the way other people make things up. So I think entertainment would be the one thing that I really want. I want people to read.
And I have to say that's what I found with reading the fancies. So
I'm so glad. Thank you.
Like I said, I loved the characters.
Optic.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun. Writing this novel. It was hard. It was really hard at times. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. You know, my daughter said to me when I was getting ready to do publicity for this novel, she's like, "Are you gonna tell them how much you cried?" But it also made me laugh so much more than most books. So
yeah. And is there any feedback you've received from any readers that you could share with us?
Yeah, I had one email from a really lovely woman who used to live in. So the town in the story is called Port Kingerton, which is a name I made up. It's a fictional town, but it's set in the southern tip of South Australia in a crayfishing town. And there is very much a crayfishing town at the southern tip of South Australia called Port Macdonnell. And I wanted to be clear that this is not Port Macdonnell, but for people who live locally, it's very similar, geographically at least. And I had a woman email me who grew up in Port Macdonnell, or Port Mac as we call it, and she was so happy with how the town was described. You know, she talked about growing up sitting on the jetty, freezing, eating hot fish and chips. And she talked about the small town, how everybody knows everybody's business, or everybody thinks they know each other's business. And there's just nowhere to escape that. And she said that was so well captured and it made her feel really happy. So I just loved to hear that feedback from a reader, to be able to relate to it so much was really fantastic.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Well, thanks so much for chatting with me. It's great to have you were author for the day not long ago, and loved seeing your post then, and great to be able to talk to you. Hope I have a chance to talk to you again when you have a new book out.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thanks so much for having me, Jackie. I loved being author of the day. It's an amazing group. I felt so welcomed.
Yeah,
And
that's good to hear.
gracious readers. So many, like huge readers. It was just
Mm,
phenomenal to see the amount of books that your group reads. So
mm,
it's been really wonderful, and I've loved chatting with you
yeah,
and meeting
thanks.
face to face as much as we can.
Yeah. No, thank you. And thanks to those who asked some questions. We
Yeah,
had some
thanks
great
everyone.
questions. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.